We are back with another episode of the After the Timeout podcast. Today's guest is Shimmy Gray-Miller, assistant women's basketball coach at the University of Minnesota. We have a great conversation with Coach Miller about her playing career, as well as her transition into coaching, and much, much more.
All right, Coach, let's start with our opening tip. We like to do our homework. So we read a story that when you were growing up, you kind of began playing ball on the backboard that had, no rim before your mom kind of bought you like a miniature hoop. We just want to go back to when you started playing basketball and like what made you fall in love with the game so early, and keep going.
I'm laughing right now because you guys went way back. I don't even know where you found that from. That's pretty good. Shout out to your research team. So I grew up in Flint, Michigan. And so for the first 4 years of my life, we actually lived in the projects. And then we moved to a house on the north side of Flint. And I have two older brothers. My brothers are 10 and 11 years older than me. So I just wanted to hang out with my brothers, and we had this basketball hoop, and their older friends actually dunked down the rim. They ripped the rim down, and so my mom said she refused to replace it. And so I would see, if my brothers were playing basketball, and I just wanted to be like my big brothers. And so I didn't even have a real basketball. It was one of those little like that you get in the supermarket, the little like plastic ball things that you play kickball with or whatever. And that's what I use. And I would just go out there by myself and just do what I saw my brothers doing. And it was actually my oldest brother, Robert, who actually bought me for Christmas my first adjustable little kids hoop. And it was a little Nerf ball and the adjustable, and he would get on his knees and he would play with me. And he would block my shot every single time from his knees. So that's kind of how my love of basketball began. I just wanted to do what my big brothers were
doing. We do like to do our homework, and I did actually find a very old story. I think when you were the head coach of SLU, that's how I found that information.
Well, good job.
Well, the other thing we wanted to hit with you before we get into really the talking about basketball and recruiting and et cetera was we saw that you guys, when you moved to Flint, according to the story, you were talking about how you were the only African-American student in the school. So what was, take our listeners through, what was that experience like, whether it was on the court playing basketball, off the court, and kind of what did those experiences teach you?
Okay. So here's the deal. So like I said earlier, I lived in the projects. And my mom was white. So actually, my mom is white. I'm biracial. My father's Black. And we lived in the projects, and my mom was one of the only white people that lived in the projects. Then we moved to Flint, to the north side, which is city, all Black, all African-American. So I went to a big school, where maybe we had 10, white kids. But everyone else was Black. But I got picked on a lot because, once again, I had, the only white mom, in the hood. And so I got called zebra, and, kids are cruel. And, and so salt and pepper, zebra, mixed girl, white girl, I all got called all that. And now I'm in fourth grade. And my brothers, like I said, they're 10, 11 years older. So they've graduated high school. They left, they moved to Texas. And it was just me and my mom, and she didn't feel safe in the neighborhood anymore. So now we moved to Flint Township. So not really the suburbs, it's a township. And so it's outside the city limits, still a Flint area, zip code and address, but it's outside the city limits. And now I'm the only Black kid in the school. And so, I got picked on because I talked differently. I'll never forget this, you guys. I had surgery when I was in fourth or fifth grade. And so my class, they made me cards, handmade cards, and the teacher delivered them to my house, to our apartment. Actually, we lived in an apartment. Me and my mom moved to a 2-bedroom apartment. And one of the little boy, he wrote like, I miss you, we miss you. and all the things that you say. And he was making fun of the way that I talked. So I didn't say ask, I said ax. I mean, it is what it is. And that's how I grew up talking, and so he drew a picture of a guy like hitting a kid with an axe, and he's like, let me ask you a question. And first of all, can you imagine in 2021 the teachers now proofreading these cards and letting that card get out? But I mean, this was in the 80s, and even as like a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, however old I was at the time, I remember thinking for the first time, I'm different. I talk different. They see me, I'm different than I'm different than everyone else. And it was the first time that I realized that I was different, and that not only was I different, but I was seen differently. And it hurt. And so I became very intentional about how I spoke, what I said. I would enunciate my words. Ask. Can I ask you a question? I remember another instance where I was at like a slumber party with a bunch of girls from my class. Once again, I'm the only black girl in the house, and someone said the N-word. And then everyone looked at me, and then they said, but no offense to you, Shimmy, you're not one of them, you're one of us. So it was, to grow up, kind of like trying to navigate that. So Monday through Friday, I'm the only Black kid in the neighborhood. And then on the weekends, I go back to visit my cousins in the inner city, and they started noticing that I'm talking differently now. So now I go back to hang out with my cousins, and they're like, why are you talking funny? And I'm like, I am. And they're like, yeah, you're talking funny. And then I go back. So, I mean, that's tough. That was really tough. And a lot of credit to my mom. She never allowed me to forget who I was. She kept me very much rooted and entrenched and connected to my Black family and friends, but it was a very difficult time for me navigating. And I think that's, as we bring sports into it, I think that's probably why I really kind of gravitated towards sports. I didn't just do basketball, I also ran track. And sports was on the court or on the track. That was the one place where it was okay, for me to be different. I stood out in a different way because I was better than everyone else. And I wasn't the Black kid or the mixed kid or the Black girl who talks like a white girl. I was number 33, or I was the athlete, or I was the captain, or I was the track star, or I was the basketball star. And so basketball, track, sports, they became kind of like my safe place, a place where I felt like I fit in.
That's a perfect lead in, because you mentioned the athlete piece. We kind of want to talk about when you were recruited. You were recruited all over the place. What made you choose Michigan, and then how did that experience being recruited affect the way you recruit athletes today?
So I'll give you the simple story, the real story. I don't know if I've told this story. The reason I chose Michigan is because Michigan State dropped me. I wanted to be a Spartan. I wanted to go to Michigan State. And they dropped me right before, I think they dropped me the summer before my senior year. And then Michigan actually saw me at a tournament. I played really well, and then they started recruiting me. So that's why I went to Michigan. That's the truth. Now, everything happens for a reason. And I obviously, I made the right choice. Everyone made the right choice. I hate Michigan State. Not as much as I hate Ohio State, though, but I hate Michigan State. So with the one thing that I was able to get out of my experience with recruiting that's carried over to how I recruit is just relationships. The coaches that knew me, that took the time to get to know me as more than just a basketball player. The coaches that just call and all they want to do is talk about basketball, and so to this day, I like to ask questions. I like to ask recruits questions. I know how you are as a basketball player, and all the recruits are going to say the same thing. They're all going to say, I want to play in the WNBA, yet they can't name 2 WNBA players. I want to play at the next level. I want to, but I want to know like who you are. I want to know like your who factor, because then I think that drives, everything else about you.
So here's an interesting follow-up. So now you're at Michigan. You know, we had to bring it up. We noticed that you were there the same time as the Fab Five. So what was that experience like? Maybe as a women's basketball player, while the men's basketball team is clearly getting a lot of attention. And what do you kind of remember about that experience just with them on campus? And then my favorite follow-up is, did you guys ever get to play any pickup with the men's side?
So that was wild. Like, it wasn't just the Fab Five. Desmond Howard. I also went to college with Desmond Howard. Our hockey team was really, really good. We had several guys who've gone on to have great, illustrious NHL careers. Our hockey team was excellent. Some Olympian swimmers, Eric Namesnick. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him or not. Won a gold medal in the Olympics. So it was just wild, to be a Wolverine during that time. And Chris and Jalen and Juwan, those guys, they were fun. We hung out with them. We were friends. We would hang out together. But with that being said, Michigan has come a long way. We were just there a couple of weeks ago to play, and they have these amazing facilities that are available to both male and female athletes. They've come a long way since the early 90s. And how they treat their female athletes. And so what we would do is, we didn't get training table. Female athletes didn't get training table, but the men's basketball players and the men's football players did. So then what you would do is you would just date one of them, pretend to like a football player or a basketball player, so that they would give them these pizza cards or Subway cards, so that you could get, pizza cards or Subway cards, or they would bring you a to-go box from their steak and, from their state training table or something like that. But it was a great time to be in Ann Arbor during the early 90s.
All right, so let's talk about how you got into coaching. I think we read that you wanted to be a police officer initially. So I guess kind of what was, first part of the question is, what made you want to be a police officer, coming out of school and transitioning into your professional job career, not playing career?
I've always wanted to be a cop. I wanted to be an archaeologist. When I saw a documentary when I was in 6th grade of the guy who discovered King Tut's tomb. I think his name was Howard Carter. And I was like, oh, I want to be an archaeologist. And then I found out that requires math and science. And so I was like, no, I don't want to be an archaeologist. But I don't know why, but probably it's my 9th grade, 10th grade year in high school, I've wanted to be a police officer. And I even did ride-alongs in high school. I did ride-alongs in college. I majored, well, we don't have majors at University of Michigan. It's a snobby school. We have concentrations and sub-concentrations. So I concentrated in sociology, and I got a sub-concentration in law, criminology, and deviance. And the whole plan all along was I was going to be a police officer. In Michigan, the retirement in most departments is 20 and out. So I was going to be a police officer for 20 years. I would retire in my early 40s and then go to law school. That was my whole plan. And what do they say? Life is what happens when you're busy making plans, something like that. And so 2 years in, I was 2 years in, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't me. I was every day. It's like I'm surrounded by the worst. For whatever reason, a firefighter could walk in, and everybody loves the firefighter. Everybody needs the paramedic, but the cop walks in, and it's like, boo. And so I saw the worst in people, and we worked 12-hour shifts. I worked at Ypsilanti Police Department, and we worked 12-hour shifts for 12 hours a day. I'm seeing the worst in people. And I'm an optimist. I'm a positive person. I'm a glass, half full person by nature. And it was really having an impact on me. I was becoming cynical and sarcastic and mistrusting. And I just wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. And I looked around and I saw all these cops that I worked with, and they had nice things. They had trucks and motorcycles and ski boats and jet skis and things like that, but they weren't happy. And I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be that person 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And so I was still young enough where I could bow out gracefully, and that's what I did. And I try to not make decisions based on emotions, but I also am not going to stay in a situation that doesn't bring me joy. Joy is one of my core values. And so it was, really dramatic. I literally walked in one day and I was like, I'm going to turn in my badge and my gun. I'm out of here. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew what I wasn't going to do. And so I went and I moved back home. I moved back home to Flint, to my mom's, and I got a job at a gym. And I started working out. I could work out for free after hours. I worked the front desk. I cleaned the bathrooms. And I started working out again. And so I hadn't picked up a basketball in over a year. And I lost a lot of the donut weight that I'd gained. And I started training again. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, this brings me joy. And so from there, I got an agent, and I ended up doing a tour with Athletes in Action, and I got seen and I got a contract, and next thing you know, I'm in Portugal. And then I played until I couldn't play anymore. And now 23 years later, I'm coaching. Universe it'll give you what you want. You just have to pay attention to it.
Kind of a perfect transition then. You talked about playing in Portugal. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and I guess some of the differences in the game, because you see a lot of basketball now. So some of the differences of the game in Portugal compared to maybe Europe or America, and just what your experiences was like down there and some of the things that you experienced.
It was wild. Like Todd, Jon, like I told you guys, I'm from the projects in Flint, Michigan, right? So for most of my life in Flint, I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor with me and my mom. And now I'm like, I wake up and I played and lived in Coimbra, Portugal, which is a small town. It has the oldest university in Portugal in this town, like one McDonald's, like it's not like that. It's not a big city. And I would wake up every morning in my tiny little bed, and I would open up my window and I'd look out, and it's literally like this countryside, this picturesque countryside. It was surreal, like from a kid from Flint. Like, are you kidding me? And so the biggest difference with practices is we did a lot of drills. Like, we didn't scrimmage a lot. We would do layup lines for like 20 minutes. I'm like, bro, right? I know how to make a right hand layup for 20 minutes, left hand layup for 20 minutes, pull up jumpers, 20 minutes, but just so fundamental. Like, the emphasis is on offense over there, and it's incredibly fundamental, really skilled. We work on passing, and it felt like I had it wasn't even like college. It was like, how you go to camps, like when you're like in middle school and you go to shot bake, right hand. And that's what it was like. But the players over there are just incredibly skilled. And we had like 13-year-old kids on our team, and so it was just the emphasis on fundamentals, which I loved, the emphasis on offense, which I loved. I had a lot of free time to explore, which I loved. I feel like I really, grew up over there, and I was so uncomfortable but it was uncomfortable in a good way. I grew, and I feel like I've never been the same. I did not return to Flint after Portugal. In fact, that's really when my thirst for just travel and exploring and just living in different places, it was rooted in my experience in Portugal. It was great. Like, I'll tell you guys a funny story though. One time I did not understand the language. By the time I left, I was able to read a paper, or if they taught slow enough, I could catch it. But my coach didn't really speak English. And so it was halftime, and he was like going off, and I could just hear him say, "Shimmy, shimmy," like over and over. And so I looked at, one of my teammates, Christina, and I said, "What is he saying?" And she looked at me and she said, "Trust me, you don't want to know. But if I were you, I would play better in the second half." So I said, "Okay, I got you." And I did. But I love that Portuguese experience, and I feel like it really kind of shaped me where I would be headed for the rest of my life.
So we actually ask a lot of coaches this question, but is there anything that as American coaches, we can take from European coaches to better the way we instruct or teach the game here in America?
Fundamentals. I mean, fundamentals. You know, I mean, you guys, we're all coaches, and we go to these tournaments and in the summertime, in the spring, and it's just games. But I have kids that are right now that are juniors or senior in college, and they cannot, make a left-hand layup. They cannot dribble with their left hand. They cannot pass with their outside hand, you know, and but they can do a Euro step, which they don't even do in Europe. They can do step backs, and but they can't make a left-hand layup or pass with their outside hand. So fundamentals, the emphasis needs to be more on fundamentals and one-on-one and 3-on-3, and less on playing like 3 games a day, in a 3-day tournament. It's ridiculous to me. So if that's the one thing that I would say is fundamentals and uniformity. Like in Australia, they have, it's amazing. They have like their training center, and they teach, like, all of their coaches train under this training center. So they send out instructional videos each week or each month that all of the youth coaches are then instructed and use as guidelines to teach their young players. And we just have this great void of fundamentals at this level.
Quote of the episode is, they don't even do the Euro step in Europe. So we wanted to hit on 2 organizations. And again, we've talked to multiple guests about this. I know we talked to Lynn Dunn a lot about the Women's Basketball Coaches Association. How do we continue to get more African-American women involved in the coaching side, especially getting them to have more opportunities to be head coaches? And then how do we just continue to grow the women's game overall?
So I think it's happening. I really do. I mean, if you look at the landscape right now, when I was a head coach at St. Louis in 2005, I think I was only one of 7 D1 female head coaches, African-American Black head coaches that were out there. And now you look at that number, it's grown exponentially. Obviously not at the rate that it needs to be, but it's growing. I think organizations like WBCA, the Women of Color organization, which kind of grew out of a need because the BCA kind of went away for a little bit. Coaches, like you mentioned, Lynn Dunn, who is such a great force. She's a force for growing our game and women. I think it's happening. You have other organizations, We Coach, which isn't specific to basketball, but for women coaches of all sports at all levels. So you've got some great resources that are out there. And I feel like the mentoring is occurring. Representation is happening. We're being more vocal about it. I know Morgan, I believe her last name is Crespo. She has these shirts out, more than a recruiter, more than a coach. And I know that female African-American Black coaches have really embraced that model, as we are more than recruiters. And then we're proving that by doing the work. We're putting in the work. We're doing the work at a rate that we weren't doing 20 years ago. As far as the X's and O's, standpoint of the game, you see more African-American coaches at the clinics. When 20 years ago, you go to WBCA clinic, there weren't any Black female coaches presenting on X's and O's. We were presenting on recruiting and building relationships and things like that. So it's happening, you guys, just probably not at the rate that people would like, but it's happening. When you look at what it was like 20 years ago when I first started compared to now, it's happening.
So you mentioned in that answer that your time as a head coach at St. Louis, and then you also mentioned your personal core values and pillars. So when you started at St. Louis, what were some of the key pillars and values that you wanted to establish going in there? And then conversely, I guess like a little two-part. So I guess instead of being three-part, is there anything you wish you would have established that you didn't? And maybe some advice for a first-time head coach.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of wrap this all up into one. So when I was the head coach at St. Louis University, I was 32 years old. And I had only had 6 years of a coaching experience, one at the JUCO level and then 5 as an assistant. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was not qualified for the job. I'll be the first to admit that now. I didn't seek the job. They reached out to me. So, I mean, they contacted me and I interviewed. I went through the interview process and I was the best of the interview, or however they felt. They offered me the job and I took it. And in hindsight, I wasn't ready to be a head coach, and it was not a good job. We had terrible facilities. They had had one winning record in like 21 years. It just wasn't a program that was destined to succeed. And but I did it because I was young and dumb and I had this massive ego. But I also had an athletic director, Cheryl Levick, who I'm incredibly grateful for. One of the few female athletic directors in Division I at the time. And she trusted me. She saw something in me before I even saw it in myself. And she was going to be a mentor to me. She wasn't just going to be my boss, but she was going to mentor me. And that's what she did for 2 years. And we did pretty good for the first 2 years. In fact, good enough that I got a contract extension after my second year. But then she got fired. Politics, she butted heads with the president. She got fired. And so then I went my entire third year with no AD. And then I got an AD who came in, and it's really hard to be successful at any level if you're not supported by your administration. And he had a vision of what he thought the program should look like, and it was completely different than what I thought. And we butted heads, and eventually he let my contract expire. So, I was gone, and that's that. But now in hindsight, here's the deal. When I came in, for my interview, I had this book, that everyone has, and I had like a mission statement, I had a philosophy, and I had, my recruiting philosophy, and I had a vision, and I had, and I was all like, but here's the deal. None of it meant anything. It was like, literally, it was stuff that I had gotten from like the internet, or I had a book that I would keep, like, when I'm a head coach, I'm gonna, do this. And half my stuff wasn't even my own, philosophies. It was stuff from like Bob Stoops and, like all these other great head coaches that I admire. Gino. Well, I'm not Gino. I'm not Bob Stoops. I can't take their stuff and then just rewrite it as mine and pass it off. But I didn't know what I was doing. So now let's fast forward years later. It's COVID, and I'm doing a lot of like personal growth, and I'm taking a lot of online classes and things like that. And so I did my strengths. I did the strengths finders, and so I developed my strengths, and from there I developed my core values, and then it was kind of like, oh my gosh, this is what I was missing, and 20 years ago in 2005 or however long it was. I didn't have any core values. No wonder I failed. I had a vision and a mission statement, a philosophy and strategies, but I had no core values. And your core values, like that's your foundation. That's what you build anything on. And if your foundation isn't solid, if it's not grounded in your core values, then at some point, it's going to crumble. And so that's what I was missing in 2005. I didn't have core values. I didn't even know what my non-negotiables were. Now in 2021, as a 49-year-old, I know what my core values are, and that's like my North Star. Like that guides me in decisions, whether or not I'm taking a job, relationships, recruiting, whatever. My core values is my North Star. So for any young coach out there, you've got to figure out like who you are, what you're going to stand for, what your non-negotiables are. And I think, and you also need to figure out your strengths, because the more time that people work like in the realm of their strengths, the more engagement, the more enthusiasm, the more passion, the more satisfaction you're going to have. And so there's so many people out there that are like, I want this, I want this, I want this, but you don't even know who you are. So how do you know what you want when you don't even know who you are? And that's the difference between 2021 Shimmy and 2005 Shimmy. And so it's taken me a long time to figure that out. And, it's kind of like my whole win the day. If you follow me on Twitter, I say that a lot. That didn't come from a place of like, of just happiness and, euphoria. Win the day came actually in my last year at St. Louis, when I knew that my contract was going to be up and I wasn't going to be renewed. And so I didn't want to just get through the season. I wanted to win the season regardless of record, on court records. But only way I could do that is by each day, I got to win this day. And I owe that to the players on that team. And so I actually measure how I win each day. I win each day. The first thing I do is I show up prepared with the right attitude. The second thing is I'm engaged. I've got to be engaged with directed effort. And then I want to give energy to what's in my heart. And then lastly, I control the controllables. And if I can do those 4 things, then I've won the day.
So it was interesting as you're answering that, it actually led into my next question perfectly. So you've been an assistant at and I'm going to leave some off, but I believe Florida, Minnesota, Arizona, Washington, Nebraska, Texas Tech, Clemson. How'd I do?
I think you did. I think you got it. I think.
So I think an interesting question for you is, at each of those stops, and you kind of started to talk about it, but how did you develop individual relationships with your athletes at each stop? Obviously, those are very different places, very different parts of the United States, sometimes very different places to recruit from. How did you develop those relationships?
Just by being myself. That's the easy and the very simplified answer. I talked a little bit earlier about my strengths. And so I did this through, what is the Strengths Finders? Clifton. And ironically, my 5 strengths, my top 5 strengths are intelligence. And although I'm a Michigan grad and I would love to say that, that means IQ, it really doesn't. It's that intelligence is more about like my creativity, things like that. But then my other strengths are developer, adaptability, connectedness, and relator. So if that's not like what you just described, bouncing around from place to place and being able to build relationships and recruit and, adapt, then I don't know what is. So.
All right, so we want to move into our last 2 segments here. First one is called 30-second timeout. It's your platform to talk about anything you want to discuss. It could be basketball, it could be family, something you're passionate about, charity, whatever it may be. Your very, very loose 30 seconds will really give you all the time you need to talk about something you're passionate about or something you want to talk about.
All right, Goods for Greatness. It's a charity that I kind of stumbled upon a few years ago. Someone reached out to me about it. And what it is, it's an organization that provides athletic equipment, new and used, for underserved kids so that they can play sports. I was that kid in Flint, Michigan. I didn't have the nice shoes. I didn't even always have a basketball or a rim, as we talked about earlier. So this organization, it provides equipment for those kids who wouldn't be able to play sports because they don't have a baseball bat, or they don't have cleats, or they don't have volleyball pads. And so you can find them on Twitter or social media. They have a website, and it's Goods for the number 4 Greatness. It's a wonderful organization. They take cash donations, or they take, you can donate your slightly used equipment that you don't use anymore: tennis rackets, golf clubs, basketballs, pennies. And then Rian Potke does a phenomenal job of finding and distributing them to kids all over the country. It's just a wonderful organization that I've been involved with for a few years.
That's awesome, Coach. Thank you. We will definitely put that on our Twitter and shout them out because that is important. If they don't have the equipment, they can't participate. So we wanted this is always our favorite segment. We call it Quick Hitters. Some of our stories are going to have to do with actual basketball, and some of our questions are going to have absolutely nothing to do with basketball at all. This is where we just like to have a little fun. So our first one is for you. What's your favorite like high school sports memory? It could be a game, an experience, hanging out with your teammates, just something you remember.
My first game on varsity, the youngest kid on the team. Really, really excited. Your girl scored on the wrong basket.
Okay.
And I did not, and everyone was laughing and I didn't know why. And I was like fist pumping. I was like, yeah, running down the court. And the senior looked at me and she was like, you just scored on the wrong basket, dummy.
All right. In game, water or Gatorade?
Water. I don't even like Gatorade.
Okay. All right.
All right. After, so you're at Michigan or you're playing Portugal. After the game, hot tub or cold tub to recover?
Cold tub.
Oh,
I would agree with you, Coach. I agree.
Yeah.
All right. So other team scores with 7 seconds left. Timeout or letting them play it out?
Oh, this is probably one of the reasons why I got fired at St. Louis too. I want to let them play. I mean, I do believe that you have to work on your end of game situations every day. But I mean, especially if you've got a point guard, a dynamic point guard, I want to let them play. Like right now, we've got Jasmine Powell here at Minnesota. I just want to let her play. Just go make a play.
all right. So I just tweaked this one. Favorite food, but that other people may not like. Is there a food that you like that other people are like, that's gross?
That's easy because I'm a vegan. So almost everything I like, everybody thinks is gross. I can hook some tofu up. How many different ways can I make tofu? I'm up to like 16. So I'm going to go with tofu or kale.
Okay. All right. Favorite Twitter follow?
So I have a Twitter rule. If I'm going to follow you, it's because you're going to teach me something or because you're going to make me laugh. So I'm going to go with New York Times Daily, probably. It's my favorite Twitter follower. Or maybe some random comedian that I follow that they may. Oh, you know what? I take it back. Room Raider. I started following them during COVID. They like take screenshots of different Zooms and interviews when people are doing Zoom like this. Like they would take a screenshot of this and then they would rate my room. You get points for like aesthetics. I would probably get a 6 out of 10 on this.
Oh, I'd have been in trouble when I was doing these in my garage. I would have gotten blasted, John.
Yeah, Todd, you would probably get like a 3 right now.
That's all right.
Wherever you are right now.
That's all right. I'm okay with it, I think.
All right, Coach, we're interested. Just to finish the episode. What is everybody does this with New Year's coming up? Do you have like a word or a phrase or a thought that you want to go into 2022 with?
Uncontrolled. I want to be uncontrolled by the thoughts, the opinions, the intentions, the motivations of others. And I want to stay focused and control my controllable. So uncontrolled would be my word.
So Coach, as we wrap up, honestly, this was one of my favorite episodes in terms of energy. You mentioned your energy multiple times during this episode, and it's very contagious. You're so positive, you're so energetic, you're so welcoming. So we can't thank you enough for joining us and telling your story.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Thanks for reaching out to me and inviting me on this. I've had a chance since we first connected. I've listened to about 6 of your episodes now. I'm a fan. I love just the diversity, the range. I just, my favorite was probably the Julie with basketball psychology. I've actually shared that with the rest of the staff. That was such a good episode. So thank you for what you do and how you grow our game. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, hosted by Todd Zazadil and Jon Flicky. For more show content and upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter @AfterTheTimeOut or subscribe to our podcast for upcoming episodes. For show inquiries, you can email us at afterthetimeout@gmail.com. You can find all of our previous episodes on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts by searching After the Timeout. We appreciate you listening. Tune in next time for more coaching content in-game, out of the game, and anything in between.